Good afternoon, everyone. Well, Mark Norman's charges were indeed dropped, and there is still fallout to come from this. Because just like SNC Lavalin, more questions abound. And that's kind of my thoughts, but this is Mr. or Senator Honorable Leo Housakis. Sorry if I've got that wrong, sir. And he says, quote, "It's love scam all over again. Now that charges have been stayed in the Mark Norman case, Canadians are left with more questions than answers. I ask a few of them today in the chamber. Watch. We're going to watch the first question. And in it, he says that Mark Norman's legal costs have been paid. And I didn't know that. So that is true. I've got footage of Mr. Sijan, Harjit Sijan, saying, yeah, we're going to pay the legal costs in light of today's decision. So it's all coming up Mark Norman. I've also got Mark Norman's presser, the full thing, but the microphones are all set up poorly. So this one's the best one I could hear for his remarks, but a link will be to the whole thing in the description. First, here's Senator Housakis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the government leader and also concerns Vice Admiral Mark Norman. While the lawyers in this case came out today and denied there was political interference with the decision to stay the charges, although I'm not sure how the defense would know that, let's be clear, this case has been politically motivated from the start. The Prime Minister was politically embarrassed by a leak of a very political decision, and he wanted someone to pay for that, going as far as to say that this matter would be before the courts long before Vice Admiral Norman was even ever charged. But when it came down to it, the government dragged its feet in disclosing documents to Vice Admiral lawyers, and when documents were released, government leader, they were heavily censored, like the 60-page memo to the Prime Minister from former Clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Warnick, which was fully redacted. Although the charges have been stayed, Canadians still deserve to know what happened and why it happened, perhaps now even more than ever. What was the government so afraid of in these documents that they would reveal? Will the government commit to full disclosure of the details that led to the collapse of their case against Vice Admiral Norman? Or is this the same as the threatened lawsuit against Andrew Scheer, in which Justin Trudeau got ahead of himself and now realizes that he's the one who actually has something to hide?
Senator Harder.
Again, let me repeat that the decisions to prosecute and to stay the prosecution were made by the Director of Prosecution Services and not at the direction of the government, and that the consequences of the decision to stay the procedures were made by the Director through the appropriate channels at the time that the Director felt it was appropriate.
Senator Housakis.
Government Leader, Senator Harder, as far as the lawyers in this case coming out today and denying there was political interference in the decision to stay the charges, did they make that statement as a condition of having these charges dropped? We've heard today that the government has already made a financial agreement with the defense. But have there been other conditions attached to this particular agreement? For example, confidentiality agreements. Have they been attached to this agreement? How far is this government willing to go to cover up its own corruption? And at what cost to taxpayers? You said earlier in an answer to the government leader in regards to the prosecutor's office making it clear today in a statement that there was no political interference in the Vice Norman case. Why didn't they make the same clear, defined comment when it came to the SNC Lavalin case? Can the government ask the prosecutor's office to make the same declaration they made today on the Norman case regarding the SNC Lavalin case, that there was no political interference in the DPA request?
Senator Harder.
I thank the Honourable Senator for his plethora of questions. Let me simply repeat that
And he does repeat it, so we're not going to listen to it again, but he says the same thing he said the first time. I wanted to show you both because I wanted him to say the piece on the financial, like covering the legal costs. Here is Harjit Sijan talking about that. The Liberals are mumbling into the microphone, so I apologize at the low volume on this, but at the beginning, I'm going to start it like halfway through because he mumbles.
No, this is where the Vice Admiral's we'll be having a discussion with the Deputy Minister, and then we'll go through the appropriate process.
And you would pay the full amount, no matter what it is?
That's,
or
we'll
is
have
that
to have, the
capped?
discussions will have to happen regarding that, and so the decision has been made, and once we get all the information, then we'll have a much better answer for that.
Yeah, they're looking at $500,000 in legal fees.
As I stated, I have authorized to pay for the piece because the decision that has been made today. They'll have those discussions and the amount will be figured out. So based on...
So interesting questions with, very succinct answers. We don't know what the conditions are on that payment. We don't know anything like that. But during Vice Admiral's press conference, he says, I have a story that needs to be told. I think Canadians will be interested in hearing it, and it's going to be told over the next couple of days, the next 3 days, I think he said. So, that's interesting. Here's the National Post, and I wanted to point this out. I just want to show you, this is the National Post. I used this article this morning. It was posted yesterday, but in the bottom of this article, it says, quote, Norman has faced mounting legal costs because of the lengthy battle to gain access to documents. He originally requested financial assistance from a special government fund that covers legal fees for federal employees, but the Department of National Defense declined that request, claiming Norman had already been found guilty of disclosing confidential information. That determination of guilt was made by a small group of bureaucrats. They did not conduct any investigation, and DND has declined to say how it arrived at this determination of guilt. That's a big question mark still, and one that I didn't hear the senator or Mr. Sijan talking about, and I think that that's interesting. Wrong one. I think that that's interesting. So, anyway, it is very pertinent, the fact that they decided to not give this innocent man legal aid because he was guilty, and that guilt determination was determined by a bunch of bureaucrats. Imagine if you were maybe not the Vice Admiral of the Navy, but maybe a lieutenant or a private first class or something to that effect. Somebody who couldn't afford to have $500,000 in legal fees racked up because you don't have a house to mortgage. What happens then? I'll explain what happens then. You give up and you get crushed by the machine that crushed you, and you admit defeat. That's what happens when you run out of money and run out of resources. And I think maybe that's potentially what the machine had intended for Mr. Norman, right? On account of the bureaucrats finding him guilty without an investigation or anything. Really? So here is Mr. Norman's statement after having the charges dropped, after having everything removed. You can read them. The link is in the description. We're just going to watch his statement here. And I was saying, Mr. Sijan's statement was much louder than I thought, so I let it run. But the way the microphones are configured here, it's a little bit annoying when he turns his face away from the microphone because it silences him. But I think it's probably worse for me than it will be for you. But I know everybody's really sensitive about sound, so I apologize for the levels here, guys. Here we go.
With the Crown's decision to stay the charges against me. While I'm relieved to be exonerated of any wrongdoing, I am disappointed it has taken this long. The alarming and protracted bias of perceived guilt across the senior levels of government has been quite damaging, and the emotional and financial impacts of this entire ordeal have taken their toll. I have an important story to tell that Canadians will want and need to hear. It is my intention in the coming days to tell that story, not to lay blame, but to ensure that we all learn from this experience. I would like to express my sincere appreciation for the support of Marie Hennon, Christine Mainville, and my entire legal team, some of whom are with us here today, for their wisdom and guidance. I could not have placed my and my family's life and future in better hands. Ultimately, I look forward to my immediate reinstatement and a return to serve in Canada, something that I have done unfailingly for the last 38 years, something that Canadians should expect and demand. In closing, I want to speak directly to the thousands of Canadians who stood by me, who supported me and my family, both spiritually and financially. We would simply have never made it here without your generosity and help. Thank you.
So at that point, it was cut, and he says, "We'll take questions now." And so that's where this feed comes in. The first question was from Ezra Levent. Actually, it was quite interesting. He says he asked, "What is the exculpatory evidence? Why did the government drop this case?" He says, "You slung a lot of mud. What's the detergent? What's the thing that triggered this dropping of the charges?" And nobody will answer him. So he asks the defense team, he asks the prosecution team as well. There was a tweet that I had pulled out, and if I can find it, I'll put it in the description. But it's Ezra following the prosecutorial team, and asking the question, like, don't you think that people should have the answer of, there are more questions than answers here. Don't you think the Canadian public deserves to know, essentially, is what he's saying. So, and I think that is true. I think that the Canadian public does deserve to know. There's a lot of really interesting back and forth in the questions and answers here. The lawyer, this lady here, and I didn't catch her name, she was very on and answering questions, and the information she was sharing was interesting. I haven't watched the whole thing. I got into maybe 17 minutes in, but it's worth a watch. I don't have highlights or notes to share. I apologize. I usually have to run by now, so I'm just getting this one in there quick because this is a big story. This is the starting line of the end. This is going into the campaign. It doesn't matter anymore that the trial isn't happening. Unless, and I don't think I don't think this is the case, but I don't know for sure. But unless they've somehow silenced Mr. Norman, and I'm basing this on the beginning of his comments and what he said in the coming days, I'm going to tell my story. I don't think they've gagged him, but I think that's the only way they stop this from seriously impacting the polls for the next coming months. And as the story unfolds and the implications of that story become real and become written about, there's not a good way to spin this, right? This is the beginning of the end of the Liberals for the 2019 election. Third party, maybe no party status at all. Kathleen win levels of electability in Justin Trudeau. So stay tuned. There's more to come with this. This is just the beginning of this one. So, and go watch this whole presser here. I watch in 1.75, but it's a little quiet, so I had to do 1.5. That's why I'm only 17 minutes in. Okay. Have a wonderful day, guys. Check out the peoplespartyofcanada.ca and have a wonderful evening. Thanks for watching.